On Profile on Wednesday, we feature Maria Sarungi Tsehai, a bold and influential Tanzanian activist, media entrepreneur, and the founder of the #Change Tanzania movement. Through digital campaigns and independent media, Maria has become a leading voice for democracy and human rights in East Africa. Her work spans civic engagement, women's empowerment, and press freedom, often putting her at odds with the authorities. In early 2025, she survived a shocking abduction in Nairobi, an incident that she links to transnational repression. Despite risks, Maria continues to inspire a new generation of African change makers. Maria, so good to have you on the program. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much for having me as well.
All right, let's start when you were young, because I think much of who you became must have started with experiences as a child, and I believe your mum was an important influence.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, a lot of people know much more about my father, who was a prominent doctor and eventually became a politician and a minister. But my mother, who is originally from Hungary, is a person who dedicated her life basically to her family, and she has been key in making sure about a lot of things in terms of our raising, our thinking. And I think one of the most important part was shaping of characters, as you know, most mothers are very key for children. And in that, I think what she really strived always was to ensure that we can think for ourselves and we're able also to stand up for ourselves. She always used to tell me whenever, and which was quite often when I was younger, of being bullied, that you know, you need to stand up. You can't keep waiting for us to intervene. I mean, even if they did, which, you know, as any parent would, she said, you know, there'll come a day when we'll not be around, and then who's going to defend you? So you need to learn how to defend yourself. And of course, what I think is more important is not to defend necessarily physically, but basically when people bully you, you just look them in the eye, and which is, I think, is very important. And, you know, just stare them down, respond, don't run away from them, you know, listen to them. And I think with experience, what I really learned through this very important advice is that actually bullies are cowards. When you confront them, they're really cowards. So if they're bigger than you, they'll beat you up. Otherwise, they really are cowards. And oftentimes they like to appear that they are so strong and brave, but deep down, they're very insecure people.
You then went to study in Hungary, your mother's homeland, and I just wonder your experience there. How did it influence your perspectives on communication and advocacy?
Well, it did influence a lot. I mean, it was not a very strange land like it was to my father, who in the late 50s went to study in Hungary and was among the first African students to do that. So I think it was different for me. We had occasionally, not that many times, already visited Hungary, so it was not like I was completely unfamiliar. But I think living there was different than visiting. Of course, when you visit, you stay for maximum a month. Everybody's really nice, of course, because you're only there for a short while, right? So you don't necessarily get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I also think that it was at a time when there was also a lot of change. So it was in the entire 90s to the early 2000s. So that was a time when there was a lot of change happening all the way around the European continent. So there was also a lot of fallouts, but there was also the rise of the right wing, especially the skinheads. They used to attack foreign students, dark students, but even people with dark skin, like the Roma people. So it was very difficult at that time. Of course, this quieted down later, but for very long we had to be on the lookout. But I also think the fact that that much used to meeting people of color back then, who had this mixed heritage. So that was also something that I often faced. Sometimes it was outright racism, but sometimes it was more of ignorance. It was more of like, I've never seen a person look like you, or I've not seen people with hair like you. I think that has changed, of course, with time, especially with the social media and media overall.
So, what then inspired the creation of hashtag Change Tanzania movement? One hears stories about Julius Nyerere and the role that he played in emancipating and helping the emancipation of many African states. What happened? How has Tanzania changed for you to want to change it?
Very good question, actually. So, I think very briefly, the hashtag is something that I tweeted out, and it was people who later looked for me and said they want to join the movement, that I actually started thinking that this can be a movement. And it's not really mine anymore. It's just something I tweeted out. I work with a smaller group of people who have been more dedicated in making sure the movement continues. Very briefly, we registered it as an organization in Tanzania, but we got deregistered by the government in 2019. So that in itself shows you the kind of authoritarianism that has happened. But back to the main question, which is for me more about what happened and why change. It is because you cannot have the same party ruling one nation for 60 years and believe that that is because people just love the same party for 60 years. I mean, that's at least a generation, if not two, that have passed through elections, and they cannot have the same taste. So it is clear that there's something wrong. The 2020 elections is a very great example of the fact that you cannot have a parliament with 99.9% from one political party, which is the same ruling party since independence, hold the seats in parliament and make everybody believe that these were authentic elections. Same applies for the local government elections. And we know that this was because of two things: massive rigging and also extreme violence. But that all is being underpinned by the fact that we have a constitution that was written in 1977. That constitution in itself was first written in order to give CCM, the ruling party supremacy. So the parliament was actually the caucus of the CCM executive committee. So it was really, really a more communist kind of one-party state constitution. And then in the 1990s, during the whole global change toward democracy and multipartism, there were some amendments that were done. But of course, as we all know, the DNA of the Constitution is such that underneath there is still a lot of power being given to the president, which is an imperial presidency, and also there is a lot of leeway for that presidency to utilize some of the constitutional powers and cannot be questioned. I mean, imagine our constitution says that the election of the president cannot be questioned. So if you have anything and you want to challenge and say, the most important office that is an imperial presidency, you're not satisfied with the results, you cannot have any, redress. So I think if you look at it, the time had come for a new constitution. And for a minute, we had hope in 2013-14. President Kikwete acknowledged the fact that there is a need for a new constitution, formed a commission led by former Prime Minister and a former Chief Justice, Joseph Warioba. They did write a really good, robust draft of constitution. They traveled around the country, gathered a lot of opinion and inputs. We were very key as Change Tanzania at that time. We were registered as well. I got into the Constituent Assembly through Change Tanzania. So it was a time of hope. It looked like, this was going to be a very good democratic start. I do know that they also consulted with some experts from South Africa, from Kenya. But what happened is once the Constituent Assembly was set up, then the ruling party CCM suddenly said they're not interested in the version that Warioba had written and sabotaged it. They basically torpedoed it. And after that, the opposition walked out. I also walked out because I immediately saw that there will be no constitution written if the will of the people is overturned. But that means that we are still stuck 10 years down the road. We don't have a new constitution. The constitutional process has stalled, and we need to move on. But then there is another thing within Tanzania that a lot of people don't know. Tanzania is a country that, as you rightfully pointed out with Julius Nyerere, that was created. It was the creation of Julius Nyerere and Abeid Karume because they decided that Zanzibar and Tanganyika will unite. The Articles of Union exist, but it was very much driven by these two very strong personalities. And now we are having serious problems with the union. And nobody wants to address that, but it will eventually become a problem as well, a bigger problem. But getting back to your question, there are so many problems in the 21st century that a 1977 constitution is not addressing, and CCM is refusing completely to discuss even reforms that Tundu Lissu, the opposition leader, has been demanding, which includes, having an electoral commission, changing the constitution, amending the constitution and changing some laws. It's a complete mess. And I think that the generation that's coming, the Gen Zs, they basically are ready to live in the 21st century. They were born into the 21st century. They're ready to live the 21st century. So change is inevitable.
You said when you were young, you were taught not to put up with bullies, and sometimes governments can and do bully its citizens. Why did you step into the breach? Because it's one thing to tweet and share thoughts with people, but it's another to put yourself in harm's way, which is what you chose to do.
That's a very good question, Peter. In fact, I think every month there comes a time, at least one morning when I wake up and I'm like, I don't have to do this, which is very true. And it's a great question. I think it's just what I would say is the sense of injustice. I could have, of course, easily remained quiet. Based on the background of my family, particularly of my father's legacy, being, a staunch CCM member until his death, having had all the accolades, it would have been very easy for me to stay quiet and actually assimilate and even gotten quite high positions. I think what really got to me was just looking at the inequalities. A lot of people may not be aware, but the sense of inequality in Tanzania, both in terms of wealth, income, distribution of wealth, you're seeing that the political class, which is also the ruling class, is dominating almost exclusively. There's the scene when it comes to investment, when it comes to owning properties, when we talk about land grabbing. So CCM has basically transformed from being a liberation party and being an inspiration to many countries around the world because of Julius Nyerere's efforts to becoming an oppressor. And in the real sense, like we call them wakoloni weusi, which means black colonials. We even call them makaburu, which you don't use anymore for the apartheid, the Boers. So we call them black Boers because we are having a different treatment for anybody who's not a CCM member. And this, apart from the wealth distribution, when it comes to justice. It's a different system of justice when you're poor and when you're not a CCM member. For example, if you're in opposition or if you're an activist or even if you're just like a journalist, you get different treatment from the police. We have seen people being detained by the police and disappear in the hands of the police. We've seen people turning up tortured, beaten into silence. These are things that I don't think anybody can keep quiet if you believe that you want to live in a society that is, just and is really looking after the rights and the dignity of everyone. So I think when you ask that question, nobody chose, and I'm one of them. I didn't say that I wake up and I want to be an activist. I love what I do. I'm a journalist by training. I love what I do. I've done a lot of journalism. I'm a communication expert. I do a lot of strategic communication consultancy, and I'm pretty good at my job. So I could have continued doing it. But for me, there was nothing else. But the second is, a lot of people kept quiet. They saw that there's a price to pay if you speak up. And I always say I'll continue until I can. The day they shut me up, they'll shut me up. But what we need to do is not to show fear, because that is the main reason that they do all the brutality, that they do all the unfairness and injustice toward people who speak up. It is to silence them. And also, I was the person they wanted to make an example from, that you cannot speak up and survive and be safe and have a business and live in peace in Tanzania. If you do that, they will come for you. But just to very quickly touch on that, we have yesterday, the Minister of Interior standing up and saying anybody who criticizes the president, I've ordered the Inspector General of Police to deal with them. And this to deal with them can go all the way from sentencing you to jail, because we have extremely repressive laws, all the way to be detained and tortured, like we've seen with the Kenyan and Ugandan activists, what happened to them. And it is really something that I don't think any normal civilized democratic country can in any way tolerate, but not only tolerate, but sit by and look at it. So I think it is the responsibility of all nations, all people, to speak up when you see this kind of inequalities. But if you're the citizen, you need to definitely speak up.
I was in Dar es Salaam last week, and the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, together with other partners like the University of South Africa, held the Africa Day lecture there. And it was supposed to be talking about reigniting the African Renaissance, talking about shifting African politics. And I couldn't help but think, but hang on, Twitter has been blocked. We can't communicate this. And I just wonder what that meant in terms of this picture that the country paints to the rest of the continent and the world. And at the same time, basic liberties such as social media are being curtailed.
Yes, it's very true. And just to make a reference to that event in Dar es Salaam, I think that what CCM is doing is exploiting, I will use that word, exploiting the legacy that Julius Nyerere had built, and pretending that it's still the same Tanzania, which is not. I think it is wrong for a person, a statesperson, a very respected statesman like Thabo Mbeki, to go and to do such a lecture and not talk about what needs to be said, which is to say that CCM's time is up. Its time is up. I mean, if they're so confident that they can still keep and hold on to power, they have to stop the brutality. They have to stop the injustices. They have to stop shutting down the internet and allowing free speech, allowing free and fair election. And we cannot have the hypocrisy of people who may have benefited from the goodwill of Tanzanians. At the end of the day, it was not Julius Nyerere himself who hosted South Africans during the struggle. It was the Tanzanian people. It was not Julius Nyerere who dug into his pockets to make sure that the struggle is well funded. It was the people of Tanzania. So I think all those leaders who come and pretend that they need to somehow defend CCM, they need to know it's not about CCM. They need to defend and stand up for the people of Tanzania. And the people of Tanzania are crying for help. We have got hundreds missing in Tanzania in a very short span of time. These people have been taken by people who either identified as police or who said that they come from different authorities. These are people who have been either not found, or if they're found, sometimes they're found in bad shape and silenced for good because they're scared to speak up. They've been threatened. We have proof now from 2-3 cases that they are actually torturing people, and they're doing it through the official security system, through the police and through other facilities. There are detention centers that the Presidential Inquiry Commission on Justice, which was done a year ago, the former Chief Justice said that there are detention centers in Tanzania that are off the books. And when they were informed of that, he asked to go and visit them, and he was told that he's not allowed to go and see them. But he put it in his report, and he said this is not allowed. You cannot have black sites within the country where citizens are taken and tortured. This is worse, or maybe not worse, but this is equal to what happened to South Africa during apartheid.
I mean, just doing this interview, is this putting you in danger? I mean, it wasn't that long ago that you were forced to go to Kenya, and then you went through this horrific, traumatic abduction in Nairobi.
Yes. Well, to answer your question, no, it doesn't make me safer. It puts me in danger more and more. But I know why. It's not because what I'm saying is wrong, because I always say, if you want to argue with me, I love debates. By the way, I was the best in debate clubs in school. So I'm more than happy to have debates with people. But the reason this puts me at a higher risk every time I speak out is because I refuse to be silent. And what we are seeing is that we are having more and more young people willing to speak up, but they are not necessarily safe. So for me, every time I feel that maybe I survived the abduction, well, I was abducted for a short while, but thankfully I was not crossed into the border, because that would have been the end of me. You'd have never heard about me. But very clearly, you have a government that is hunting, like they make us praise. They hunt us because they don't want us to give an opinion. And instead of the world saying that this is unacceptable, the world is hypocritical. And what makes it even worse is they are pretending as if this, what we're talking about, doesn't matter. Let me explain, if I can, to your viewers. These are people who have families. We have families, and one of the reasons I can't stop is I've got so much messages in my inbox of families looking for their loved ones. People who hope one day, maybe because they were taken by the police, they're at a detention center and they walk back in. And that is the cruelty of it. This is what we know. The reason enforced disappearances is a crimes against humanity, because not only does it deprive you of the presence of your loved one, but it deprives you of information. You don't know if they're dead or alive. And I know that South Africans know this. This is exactly the tool that was used at the time of the apartheid, and people disappeared. And it took only once the apartheid regime fell for people to know whether their loved one died and if they can even recover the bodies. This is terrible. The kind of atrocities that's happening is terrible. And just to add, when, not if, when the CCM brutal regime that exists currently, because don't mix up the CCM of 20 years ago and now, but when this regime falls, the skeletons that will keep coming up is going to be something that people will be ashamed to have been in Tanzania at a time when the citizens needed people to speak up for them and they kept quiet. It is a tragedy.
Perhaps finally, because we've run out of time, sadly,
Yes.
but I think we need
Well,
to
I
have
can talk a
another
lot.
conversation soon.
Yes.
What message would you like to convey to young Africans across the continent that perhaps are finding themselves in the same situation you are, wanting to drive change in their communities and in their countries?
First of all, I think the young people, as I say, have been born into the 21st century. This century belongs to them. And I always say they're not the future generation. They're not the future leaders. They're the current leaders and the current generation. This is their time. I always encourage them every single time, whenever I talk to any young people, that this is an opportunity that they can never return again. They have to use it to the most. They have to keep safe. So I always tell them, you have to keep safe. Don't run toward danger, but do not be fearful either. What you need to do is to make sure that you fight for a democratic Africa. And that can only happen if you have the right laws, the right constitution in place. Do not waste time to go and protest about single issues, but look at the structural. Make sure you take up leadership positions. And finally, for those youth who think that they have to suck up to regimes that are oppressive and become part of the repressive regime, kindly do not do that. History will not judge you kindly, and you have a lot of years left. So I think that's about my message for today.
Maria, it's been a pleasure and an honor to speak to you. Thank you so much indeed for sharing your story with us. But I'm going to have another chat with you, because I think there's just so much more that we could have covered. But thanks so much for this initial conversation.
Thank you very much, Peter. I really appreciate the opportunity as well. Thank you.
All right, that's Maria Sarungi Tsehai, who's a bold and influential Tanzanian activist and media entrepreneur, founder of the hashtag Change Tanzania movement, who has put herself in harm's way to want to create a better environment for herself and fellow countrywomen and countrymen in Tanzania. And she says that the current administration isn't what the Julius Nyereres of this world created for Tanzanians, and that things need to change. Powerful, brave, and I think somebody that we need to be speaking to a lot more. It's time for your news.